Is Donald Trump a narcissist? People have argued about it for years, and on screen, his name is literally spelled out like a neat little label. But in psychiatry, labels come with rules. In this episode, we'll trace the 1964 controversy that sparked a crackdown, clarify what narcissistic personality disorder actually means in clinical terms, and explain the ethical firewall known as the Goldwater Rule. Here's the tension. You watch the speeches, you read the posts, you replay the clips, and your brain starts matching patterns. But the American Psychiatric Association has a specific guideline for this kind of public speculation. It's commonly called the Goldwater Rule. In the APA's ethics annotations, Principle 7, Annotation 3, psychiatrists are allowed to educate the public about mental health in general. What they shouldn't do is offer a professional opinion about a specific public figure, unless they've done a personal examination and have proper authorization to speak. Before we open the case file, we need to reset our language. Online, narcissist is often just shorthand for selfish, braggy, or obnoxious. But narcissistic personality disorder, NPD, is a clinical diagnosis. It isn't a vibe check, and it isn't a synonym for "I don't like this person." At a high level, NPD is characterized by a pervasive pattern of grandiosity, a strong need for admiration, and low empathy. And like other personality disorders, it has to be enduring, traceable back to adolescence or early adulthood, showing up across contexts and linked to clinically significant distress or impairment. Even prevalence is hard to pin down. Studies range widely from near zero up to about 6%, and one large US survey reported a 6.2% lifetime rate. So if the science is nuanced, imagine the risk of diagnosing a president from a television clip. To see why this rule exists, we have to rewind to 1964.
To understand why psychiatrists today are expected to be careful in public, we have to go back to 1964. It's the Cold War, and the Johnson-Goldwater race is running on raw nerves. As you're looking at Goldwater's 1964 portrait, remember, this campaign is happening under the shadow of the bomb. Goldwater was a conservative lightning rod, and opponents framed him as dangerously reckless. The most famous example is the Daisy ad, an innocent child, a countdown, and then nuclear imagery, suggesting the stakes were literally world-ending. It aired only once, but the news replayed and discussed it everywhere. And then the fight got even stranger. A small magazine called Fact decided to pull psychiatry into the campaign. They sent a one-question survey to 12,356 psychiatrists, using a list from the American Medical Association. The question was blunt. Do you think that Barry Goldwater is psychologically fit to serve as President of the United States? And when Fact published the issue, September to October 1964, the cover didn't hedge. In giant type, it declared, 1,189 psychiatrists say Goldwater is psychologically unfit to be president. On a newsstand, that reads like medical consensus. But statistically, it's nowhere close. So let's use the numbers, like the chart on screen, to see what that headline leaves out. Fact: mailed 12,356 questionnaires. Only 2,417 psychiatrists replied. That's about a 19.6% response rate, meaning roughly 4 out of 5 never weighed in. And even among the replies, it wasn't a single chorus. Out of 2,417 responses, 1,189 said unfit, 657 said fit, and 571 declined to take a position. That pie chart is the real story. A loud headline built on a minority of the people contacted. The backlash was immediate. Both the American Medical Association and the American Psychiatric Association condemned the stunt, and an APA medical director warned that a valid professional opinion requires an actual clinical examination. Goldwater didn't just complain. He sued Fact magazine and its publisher, Ralph Ginzburg, for libel. That lawsuit collided with a tough legal standard: actual malice, the rule that makes it hard for public figures to win libel cases. But the courts found that fact crossed the line. In 1969, the U.S. Court of Appeals affirmed the judgment against the magazine and its leadership. The damages told you what kind of victory this was. Goldwater got $1 in compensatory damages, basically nominal. But the jury also imposed $75,000 in punitive damages, split as $50,000 against Fact magazine and $25,000 against Ginzburg and one of his editors. So the money wasn't about making Goldwater whole. It was about punishment. After the dust settled, the profession tried to draw a bright ethical line. In 1973, the American Psychiatric Association added what became known as the Goldwater Rule, linking public commentary to professional responsibility. That's the timeline on screen. 1964's headline, 1969's court ruling, 1973's ethics rule. The principle is simple. Psychiatrists can educate the public about mental health issues in general. But it's considered unethical to offer a professional opinion on a specific public figure unless they've examined that person and have proper authorization.
When clinicians use the word narcissist, it's not a casual insult. It points to a specific diagnosis in the DSM-5 TR, which is why that teal cover on screen matters. Online, the word can mean self-centered. Clinically, it means something much narrower. And we don't diagnose from a vibe, a few clips, or a feed. A personality disorder diagnosis looks for a long-standing pattern, typically visible by early adulthood, showing up across different situations. And it has to be rigid enough to cause real distress or impairment. For narcissistic personality disorder, the DSM framework uses 9 criteria. A person needs 5 or more. So let's be concrete. 1. A grandiose sense of self-importance. 2. Being preoccupied with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love. 3. Believing they're special and should only associate with other high-status people or institutions. 4. Needing excessive admiration. 5. A sense of entitlement. 6. Being interpersonally exploitative, using others to get what they want. And the last 3 tend to be the ones the public notices fastest. 7. Lacking empathy, being unwilling to recognize or identify with others' feelings and needs. 8. Being envious of others, or believing others envy them. 9. Showing arrogant or haughty behaviors or attitudes. 5 or more across time and contexts with meaningful dysfunction. That's the bar.
That 7th point, lack of empathy, is the one people always cite regarding Trump. But does that mean someone with NPD literally feels nothing?
No, and also, we can't diagnose any public figure from a distance. But in general, empathy isn't one single on-off switch. Some research in clinical NPD samples finds emotional empathy can be weaker, less of that "I feel your pain," while cognitive empathy, the ability to recognize what someone is feeling, can be relatively intact. So a person may read emotions accurately, even if they don't emotionally resonate with them.
So, if these traits are so toxic, why do we see them in so many leaders? Not just Trump, but historically.
Because there's a real selection effect. Studies on leader emergence find that people with more narcissistic traits can come off as confident, bold, and compelling, especially early on, or when groups don't know them well. But when researchers look at effectiveness and long-term outcomes, the picture is mixed, and the charm advantage can fade. One useful way to explain that is the two faces view. Admiration versus rivalry. Admiration is the glossy side, assertive, charismatic, status-seeking. Rivalry is the brittle side, defensive, hostile, quick to devalue others when threatened. We often choose leaders at their most admiration-coded, and then stress and power test what shows up next. And this is the key distinction. High traits are not automatically a disorder. A disorder is about rigidity and impairment, not this person can't function at all, but that the pattern reliably damages functioning or relationships. Plenty of people can be successful on paper while still leaving a trail of harm behind them. That's why clinicians have to be careful, and why the Goldwater Rule exists in the first place.
So if we can't ethically diagnose a president from afar, how do we talk about what we see? We change the lens, from pathology to personality, description, not diagnosis. One common language for that is the Big 5 traits, 5 broad dimensions you'll see on screen now. It's a way to describe patterns of behavior without assigning a mental disorder. In Donald Trump's public persona, 2 traits come up again and again: extroversion and agreeableness. Start with extroversion: energy, assertiveness, social dominance. In big stage settings like this, his style is built for attention. Short, absolute phrases, strong certainty, and constant performance. In his second inaugural address on January the 20th, 2025, he opened with, "The golden age of America begins right now." That kind of high-confidence rhetoric signals command. Now shift to agreeableness. Think of the slider on screen. Cooperative and warm on one end, competitive and antagonistic on the other. Low agreeableness doesn't mean ill. It describes a confrontational, conflict-ready style, what some people call a counterpunch. And importantly, that's not just an impression. In a 2018 paper, Alessandro Nai and Jürgen Meyer asked 75 political experts to rate the perceived personality of Trump and Clinton. On those expert ratings, Trump came out very high on extroversion and very low on agreeableness. That gap helps explain why reactions split so sharply. Watch the crowd image here. The same combative moment can read as strong leader to supporters or mean-spirited to critics. So when you see the argument online, it's often not about different facts. It's about different interpretations of the same behavior. And that's the key takeaway. We don't need a medical label to describe what we're watching. A personality lens is enough. High extroversion, low agreeableness, and a willingness to embrace conflict in public. So we're back to the core question in our case file. Can we say whether Donald Trump is a narcissist? With real clinical precision, the answer is no. The American Psychiatric Association's Goldwater Rule says psychiatrists shouldn't offer a professional diagnosis of a public figure without a personal examination and proper authorization. And it's not just a technicality. Without being in the room, we're missing the history, the context, and the kind of collateral information that helps separate a loud style from a clinical pattern. But no diagnosis doesn't mean nothing to discuss. We can talk responsibly about public behavior and broad personality traits without turning them into medical labels. For example, research that asks people to rate Trump's perceived Big 5 profile often places him high on extroversion and low on agreeableness. That's about public perception of traits, not a medical finding. A dominance-heavy, conflict-forward style can look like narcissism to a layperson. In politics, though, some of those behaviours can be rewarded, strategic, not necessarily symptomatic. And this distinction still matters. As recently as 2025, including pieces published in March and December, debate over the Goldwater Rule resurfaced in outlets like The Guardian. We even saw it spill into politics directly. In Minnesota in March 2025, lawmakers introduced a bill aiming to label Trump derangement syndrome as a mental illness. Proposal or not, it's a clear example of why turning diagnoses into slogans is dangerous. Because once psychiatric language becomes a political weapon, we stop arguing about decisions and start trying to disqualify people by declaring them unwell. So here's the verdict, right there on the folder. Inconclusive on diagnosis, by design. Personality isn't pathology. Hold leaders accountable for their choices, not amateur armchair labels. Thanks for listening to this case file. If you want more deep dives into ethics and power, follow the channel.